Hello, English 1000 students. This is Dr. Morris. I just wanted to do a little mini introduction to Deborah Brandt's Writing at the Speed of Change. She tells us about Calvin Lockett and his experience with learning to communicate, or with literacy, on the railroad, and how he had to learn a lot of different tools to communicate. She tells us about semaphores and train orders, and about him running to reach a message, one of the train orders, on the hoops, in order that the trains would know which tracks to take, and all of that. This very basic sort of thing. So he's physically having to run and then move these things along. The reason that she tells us about Calvin Lockett in this particular instance is because she wants to point out the impact of technology and change on literacy. Because Calvin Lockett's job changed dramatically once industrialization hit the United States, and it changed the way we communicate. And in his case, the big change was the telegraph. It's important to remember, I think, how important different kinds of technology are to our ability to communicate. So the use of the telegraph was important to Lockett. The importance of his penmanship. Keep in mind, he's giving critical information to conductors about what tracks to take. So he's got to be readable, and he's got to be fast in order to get those messages there. He also ends up on the job having to learn Morse code, something he had never learned at school. And it's because technology's changing that he is adding these new skills. She goes on to say that his son watched him learning Morse code at home, and his son also imitated his dad and wanted to learn Morse code. But by the time he entered the work world, he had a whole new set of technology to use. So he's using email and keyboards. He's expected to have much more productive communication and much more complex communication. The standards for his literacy rise. He's reaching more people and more systems. As generations go along, and as technology comes along, and as literacy develops and changes, what happens is that gaps are created, and things become a little unstable. So think, for instance, about the kinds of technology that you use compared with what your grandparents or your parents might use. Think about social media and how you might communicate with your friends via Instagram or TikTok, whereas your parents, you might even have grandparents who actually handwrite letters, but I know that I use a lot of email, and my daughter, who is 22, doesn't use email very much. She's using text messages. So there are gaps between my daughter and I, and those can affect us in the work world. If my work creates a situation in which I need to learn to text, then I need to learn a whole new technology. And it may not sound like a big deal to you because texting is second nature to you, but you all mostly text with your thumbs. And I couldn't do that if my life depended on it. I have to, peck things out slowly, and in watching my daughter, she uses both thumbs at the same time. I have no ability to do that. If my job depends on it, it can mean the difference between having a paycheck and not having a paycheck. So literacy and technology and the economy come along and put pressure on us to learn new things and different things as they are developing. She points out that Calvin Lockett's penmanship, for instance, existed in two contexts. In its original form, when he was taught at school, it was linked to character. It was perceived that good penmanship revealed decorum and discipline and civic training. It was evidence that you were an educated person. Your handwriting in and of itself was valued. But at work, his handwriting was important for productivity. It was to make the railroad work. And when the railroad worked, it made money for the people who owned the railroad. And so his penmanship was valued for legibility and the speed with which he could write quickly. So you have one form of literacy and two contexts in which it takes on two very different sorts of stances. So she tells us these stories, and she wants to then talk about this in a more sort of academic way. And she calls the people and agents, she uses the term agents because she's referring to both people and things, as literacy sponsors. She says on Roman numeral page 13, sponsors are agents, local or distant, abstract or concrete, who enable, support, teach, model, recruit, regulate, suppress, or withhold literacy and gain advantage by it in some way. Sponsors are those agents who want our literacy as much as we do. She wants us to be critical about literacy. If you remember your American history, slaves in this country were not allowed to learn to read and write. Learning to read and write made you a viable citizen who could go out and earn your own wage. It was empowering to read and write. So sometimes people withhold literacy, and that is a very extreme example. But other agents want to promote your literacy. They might recruit you for abilities that you have. But it's not because they have just value in you. It's because they want your literacy to be used in some way by a system. So to help you get a grade in a class, or to help you graduate, or to help you do a job in various ways. So when you think about literacy sponsors, think about the agents who want your literacy as much as you yourself wants literacy. She also mentions that literacy is important to the self. Totally outside the economic context, literacy provides us with dignity, respect for ourselves, an ability to express ourselves. It creates connection. We can talk with each other. We can influence each other. We can shape our electoral decisions through literacy. It provides us continuity. By being able to write things down, we can have histories of what happened before. You can think of the family Bible, for instance, and how that records a record of the generations of families. And we can remember. My grandmother used to write on the back of photographs who was in the photograph and what they were doing. And she's long passed, but I have her handwriting that provides me continuity. It helps us develop. It helps us gain knowledge and grow. It provides us knowledge of ourselves. It may be linked to our faith. It gives us the ability to read holy texts and perhaps to interpret holy texts. In addition, it provides us with pleasure. So literacy is not always in the service of making money. It's also in the service of our own personal development. I'd like you to think about literacy sponsors. And as you do, and as you read Deborah Brandt's piece, please think of questions that you have about literacy sponsorship, because you'll be writing about this in your first paper. Okay, I wish you all well. I hope that you've enjoyed this reading and have been challenged by it and have lots of questions for me.